What advice do you have for those entering the manufacturing industry to face those types of challenges?
It is going to be a little bit harder, absolutely. So you're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to find very good mentors. You're going to have to find your sponsors. You're going to have a voice. And having a voice, sometimes it is going to be a little bit more complicated, because one of the beauties of having, diversity is diversity of opinion, diversity of, points of view. That's what helps with innovation. But have a voice. Fight for your ideas, even if initially people might look at you like, where is she coming? I mean, what is she trying to say? Have courage, persistence, and always to remember that it's not a popularity contest. But if you pursue with your ideas, you're going to get to places.
What do you believe are the most important qualities of an effective leader, especially in a predominantly male industry?
I would say that it's a relatively similar question, similar answer, in the sense that you have to have ideas, you have to have a voice. But the second component that starts becoming, extremely important is that you have to care for your team members. You have to stand up with them. You have to lead them. You have to communicate. There's a lot of communication. Once that it goes into building a team in order to become a leader, because, as we always know, it is sometimes easier and faster to do things by yourself. But if you really want to get, further away in this career, is because you're coming together with a team. So pay attention to your team members. Make sure that they have a voice, exactly the same thing that you struggle with, that you're paying it forward, and you're going to be able to lead in this space.
You kind of touched on this, but I kind of want you to delve in a little more. How do you approach the problem solving and encourage that innovation within your team?
There are a couple of simple practices that I follow. First of all, having a very open conversation, because in order to have innovation, it has to start way before than when you actually need the innovative ideas. It starts by having a team conversation where everybody feels very comfortable coming up with ideas. Some ideas we might use them on the moment. Some ideas might have to wait, but making sure that everybody feels comfortable, coming up with ideas. And one of the tricks that I learned, a long time ago, is that promoting much more that there's no one idea, but asking for 10, 15 ideas. And you say, like, why so many ideas? Because the initial ideas, the first 3, 4, 5, are going to be things that most probably people have already voiced before. By the time you start getting into the 10, 11, 12, you're really getting to things that most probably people have not voiced before. So, make sure that you're really deep diving into where the ideas, can come from. Another thing that I do is really asking on what would it take to get us to results that are 5 times, 10 times bigger than where we are. So you don't get anything that is too, like, a little incremental changes, but you start really, poking on, if you could deliver 10x, what is it that you need? Then you started really getting into an ideation of dreams, and that's where you find innovation.
I want to talk about the manufacturing industry as a whole. In your view, what are the biggest challenges currently facing the manufacturing industry?
I think that one of the biggest challenges that we are currently facing is workforce. As you know, experienced, qualified, workforce, it's retiring. I think we have about 2.8 million, workers that are, coming up to retirement. Skilled workforce, it is one of the biggest challenges that the industry is facing at this point.
I noticed at the student summit, at the Smart Force Student Summit over at the IMTS, I saw It was reported that over 14,000 students had attended that area, and I think that's at least a little bit of brightness for the future, which is good. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics also is showing that more people are getting into STEM, and that will be reflective in the manufacturing industry. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I was very excited to see so many youngsters, coming to visit us at IMTS. But we're also working on technologies that are going to be allowing, for much more of workforce training. We are developing some of our technologies by now look a little bit more like like a video game, like the controllers, the way that they work. So we're making sure that it is much more appealing for for younger generation. We're training them. We are opening internships. We work very closely with academic program. We have relationships worldwide. I think it is up to maybe 700 different institutions, from high school to colleges, making sure that we give the right visibility, that we make manufacturing exciting. We want to make sure that many more people, are following the industry.
All right, let's move on to your wheelhouse of digital transformation. So, how do you see the digital transformation affecting the manufacturing landscape? And then what steps have you taken to lead your company through this transition?
Let me start aligning on digital transformation, because I think it's a word that we use so much that by now it's overused, over-engineered. But at the end of the day, digital transformation is to really help companies to to adapt and thrive in our new world that is so fast-paced. How do you leverage, and as you asked me in the question, how do you leverage different technologies to solve problems, or really to make the most out of opportunities? As you can imagine, it involves a lot of integration, especially with our partners, our vendors. A lot of data. The Nexus conversation is really important in this portion. And speaking specifically from the marketing perspective, we're leveraging more and more immersive technologies. As you saw IMTS, we had a simulator. People can really see how all the different components are coming together. We leverage a lot of intent data so that we can deliver a highly personalized experience. We want to make sure that every single of our customers and prospects is feeling special, so that we can really understand what are the challenges that they are facing. And another area where we are investing resources, it's in AI sales support. As you can imagine, we have so many different technologies, so much intelligence, so much data, that at some point we really need to start moving on that direction.
All right, and let's wrap it up with this question here. So, what legacy do you wish to leave for future generations of women, and especially Hispanic women, in manufacturing?
It is a big question, but absolutely, I gotten to a point in my career that it's by now all about really thinking about, how to, pay it forward. I think the main component that I wanna leave is the fact that it is doable. It's the fact that we can do it. Not because day in, day out, we tend to work with majority of people that look very differently to us, is that it cannot be done. It is gonna be harder. We're gonna have to work harder, but it's doable. So I want to make sure that I inspire every young female that is deciding what to study, or any other anybody who's coming into the workforce, that you can make it all the way to the top, even if you don't look like the majority of your coworkers. Even if you come up with ideas that sometimes people at the very beginning, some of the ideas that I have, people are like, what is she talking about? And it takes you a little bit of a longer time because you're coming from a very different point of view. But having the confidence that fight for your ideas, work with everybody, of course, in a very collaborative environment. But more than anything is the fact that it can be done.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And thank you for joining us. And until next time, this is Sharon Spielman with Machine Design, and stay curious.